for listening to WhatCopsWatch.com.
They all wear uniforms.
They're honored to wear the badge.
They defend life and property and carry guns.
While they're often called superheroes, they, in the end, are humans, just like you and I.
This is WhatCopsWatch.com.
Get ready to cross the yellow podcast tape
and learn more about the thin blue line.
It's time for another episode of WhatCopsWatch.com.
Everyone that's watched television has seen something that's referring to crisis negotiation. The hostage negotiators. The guys that slow everything down and make everything good. Or do they? We're going to find out inside this very special episode of WhatCopsWatch.com today as we take on crisis negotiators with a couple of my dear friends who just happen to be crisis negotiators. Greetings, everybody. I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Pat Doran, the other host.
I'm Sean Pollock, guest.
Guest host.
I'm guest. I don't know. I'm the Canadian content. I'm the guest. I'm whatever you need.
Forgot about
just here.
I totally forgot about the Canadian part. How could I possibly forget?
Well, we are
guys,
easy to overlook. I know. It's okay.
Yeah, guys, it's great to have you inside the studio today. We're doing something very special today. Pat and I just finished jumping into and capturing a couple episodes of his new Crisis Cop podcast, which all of you will be able to listen to over Crisis Cop podcast. I'm sorry, crisiscop.com. Be sure you go over there and check it out. It's a spellbinding program, mostly because it's, believe it or not, all about crisis negotiators. And so especially for those of you that happen to be crisis negotiators or looking to get into crisis negotiation, be sure you go check it out. Again, it's over at crisiscop.com. What we're talking about today is a program called Flashpoint, which I have to be honest, I know nothing about this program. I was able to identify as...
Yeah.
Okay. I was able to identify a series of players inside of it because many of the actors have been in something else in their previous careers that I've either reviewed inside of my entertainment review career or have just glanced inside of movies that I remember. So that's awesome. I was definitively entertained. Pat, Sean, and I were able to actually watch it in tandem live last night, which is actually also another first. Now, for those that follow WhatCopsWatch.com, we typically don't watch anything live. It typically is we're all watching it sequestered all on our own, then we get together and talk about things. What I also want to urge all of you to understand as well is that as Pat develops his Crisis Cop podcast, we're going to start doing programs where that's exactly what happens, where the three of us or whoever the hosts are going to be are inside the program, capturing the details and the where-to-fores of what's going on inside the episode. But you guys will also be able to watch live, but then also later on, you'll be able to watch it again anytime that you want. Okay? We'll have more details about that coming up. Again, it's crisiscop.com for all of the details. Guys, we got so much to dig into today. We've run through a little bit of housekeeping. It's time to press on. It's time for the perspective review of Flashpoint, Season 1, Episode 5, Who's George? Guys, again, I don't follow anything inside of this series. Do you want to explain what the series is, Sean? You seeing as you're our resident Canadian, go for it.
Well, and first off, I'm proudly the resident Canadian. But Flashpoint, I have to be honest, I don't know the years that it was on TV, but it basically examines the role of the city of Toronto's SWAT team. Here they call it the SRU. In reality, it's called the ETF, I believe. But the series itself, I have to be honest, I watched it several times. It was fairly well acted. It was a fairly accurate portrayal of law enforcement in Canada, albeit with those caveats and asterisks about, look, it's condensed into whatever 35 minutes with a couple of commercials for milk and McDonald's. Like, that's fine. But the program itself was actually pretty well received in Canada during its tenure.
Yeah, it actually got picked up over here in CBS. I actually watched that. I want to say when it started, I want to say it was like 2000. Was it 2008, something like that? I don't know. But CBS picked it up. It's funny because one of my daughters is actually a big Flashpoint fan, so I don't know how she got into that, but whatever. But yeah, I found it an entertaining series. Quite frankly, it's probably one of the better ones out there that depict crisis negotiations. Obviously, there's going to be some things we can nitpick which we're going to do here. But I think overall, it's a fairly good show.
Oh, I love that, and it makes me frankly want to go back and watch the show. For those of you that are curious, you can go watch it on the Paramount Network. We've got some links inside of the show notes for this episode. Again, that's over at whatcopswatch.com/flashpoint. You can find all of the show notes to all the stuff that we're going to talk about, including the links to the actors over to Paramount Network, but then everything else that we're going to talk about inside this episode. Again, I've got absolutely nothing except this episode under my belt for the series. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, so just talk a little bit about the actors. A couple, I don't know if you want to say well-known. I think they're TV-known actors, right? You got Sergeant Greg Parker, and I'm going to butcher his name, Enrico Colantoni. I don't know. I'm not even going out there.
Colantoni.
Colantoni? Okay, I guess. I don't know. But again, not real famous, but if anybody's ever watched Veronica Mars, he's he's the dad on that. But what I thought was kind of really cool was his brother, I believe, was a Toronto police officer for over 30 years.
Interesting.
So I'm assuming he probably got a little bit of tips from his brother, which kind of be interesting to maybe track brother down, see if we get brother on the show, see what he could give us. Another guy was the Constable Sam Braddock. That's another thing I love. You guys are constables officers. We'll talk about that later. David Petkia. The only thing I could find on him was Final Destination, and it was the second one. I don't even remember if I even caught the second one.
No,
I think one was enough for me. I don't know. You big Final Destination person there, Sean?
No, I can't say I am.
Is Enrico the guy from Galaxy Quest?
I don't know. I'd have to look.
It's the balding guy at the end. There's the young kid at the end, and then there's the other guy at the end.
I have to look that up. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, anyway, the guy that I most recognized inside of this episode was the guy from Galaxy Quest. The difference is that he obviously had a completely different demeanor, but he looked exactly the same.
Could be him.
Yeah.
And then you had Hugh Dillon, who I didn't know this, but evidently he's a big Canadian rock star, whatever.
So I'll go back all the way to 1993 or 1994 when I was working at a golf course. And one of our local beer companies, which in Canada obviously is a semi-religion, had CDs in the cases of beer. So I was a bartender at the time, and I remember I opened up this CD, and there was a band called the Headstones. I had never heard of their material before. Whatever, threw it in there, and Hugh Dillon, the one character from the show, is the lead singer of the Headstones, and they have, even to this day, they still have a fairly significant. I'd even put it above a cult following. Realistically, they're a fairly well-known band in Canada. Very heavy, dark kind of music, really poetic as far as some of their lyrics and so forth goes. And I'm not saying poetic in a necessarily a lighthearted way. There's a real edge to them. But I remember seeing that, and I'm like, wait a minute, Hugh Dillon from the Headstones is in Flashpoint. And the other part, and I have this back from prior recollection, is that Hugh Dillon's also a really significant voiceover actor in Canada, and has done a number of things. My understanding is that he was the voice of, again, I'd have to be careful if it was Chevrolet or General Motors, but doing the descriptions, those calm and warming voiceovers when the truck is running through the rugged outback of the North Country here. That was his role. So it's kind of neat.
Something else I didn't know, he's also the co-creator of Mayor of Kingston, which is a really good series if you haven't caught that one. I want to say Hawkeye, Clint Barton. I can't remember what's his. Jeremy Renner is actually in that series. Okay. But yeah, if you want to check out another good series on Paramount, Mayor of Kingston, he was one of the co-creators, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Interesting. By the way, I went back and looked, and Enrico is the guy from Galaxy Quest. Yeah, so there you go.
And then pretty much, I think the only other really main character is Constable Jules. I guess it's Cullen. I don't know, but that's Amy Jo Johnson. I think she was one of the only American actors on this series. All the others were Canadian.
That would be Callahan.
Callahan, okay.
Yeah, Callahan.
More probably known as the Pink Power Ranger. I know you guys were probably all worried about that, right?
Yeah. No way.
So she is the Pink Power Ranger.
Stop the press. I got a note that it's the Pink Power Ranger.
Or how about even this? She was Julie on Felicity.
Oh, yeah.
How about that?
For all of my years and hours of watching Felicity.
Felicity. Mm-hmm. I know everybody. Come on. Closet Felicity watchers.
Right? I have to admit that I'm reasonably crapping on this show and episode, and it's not because of the actors. They're just because I don't know them. It's because I have to be honest. It's really strange being a professional entertainment critic and having watched so little in the way of television, especially as of late.
Yeah, there has been a decided waft inside of the land of entertainment, especially over the course of, say, the last 5 or 6 years, that makes it very difficult to watch a whole bunch of anything that is now television. And so finding a series like this, I'm going to have to go back and watch this, because not only did I enjoy the episode in general, I love that it bothers to take on something that is at least real life, that I now have some affinity with, having worked with both Pat and Sean and a number of other crisis negotiators for 4+ years now. And I really am impressed at the detail that's showcased inside of this. And again, the other get, John and I were talking about it last night, is trying to determine how much time we need to dedicate watching it. Between 43 and 47 minutes, depending on the market. Again, it changes and has changed over the course of the decades as we continue to go off and into the land of online things. But again, the fact remains that you're getting a good solid snapshot of a good solid story very quickly.
Very true. And I can tell you that the rest of the episodes that I did watch back, and I was watching it contemporaneously when it was on TV, they were realistic. Like they really were striving to actually get some threads of authenticity through all of the work that they were doing. And of course, I mean, much like any of the other shows that you're having on TV these days with a law enforcement content, things have to move along at an artificially quickly enhanced pace. But really and truly, like as far as any of the law enforcement shows, probably about as close to truthful as you're going to find.
Yeah. Well, what I liked about it, I like how they do their rewind. Like you start out at the end, because it's going to, obviously we had that climactic thing, right? So here it's a bank robbery scene. Guy comes out, puts the gun to her head. That's where we start out. That's the ending, and then they rewind to tell you, hey, how do we get here? I thought that's kind of a different way to do the storytelling, which I liked.
And I'm gonna ding it for that. But one of the things that I really have trouble with, and it's just about in every single instance, is the concept of flashback. The concept of utilizing flashback effectively can be done very, very well. There's a number of feature films that do it incredibly well. The one that I think about very often, mostly because of one of our perspective reviews, it's Mystic River. Mystic River is able to, I think, pull off a series of flashbacks wonderfully. Yeah. Then there's this kind of thing where I think it's kind of an impediment to what you're supposed to be taking in, especially across something that's only between 43 and 47 minutes. And so again, it's a very nuanced thing inside of especially broadcast television / online series intake. I think when it gets to online series intake, I think the impact, the negative impact of it lessens quite a bit, because if you're plowing through this season, well, hell, you're on episode 5. When you get done with this 43 minutes, you're likely to plow through episode 6 too, and so you don't really care. But if this was where you're watching your 43 minutes, you're plowing through pretty quick, and I think inserting a flashback element is a difficult thing to try and overcome.
I'll agree with you, Mike. The only thing I would say from my perspective was, as Pat mentioned, when you get to that last sort of vignette, and there's the moment of the crux of the show. Really, the one thing I was like, okay, well, whoa, hold on a sec, something's going on here. And the way that I found it was introduced, it did obviously make me want to understand what had led to that moment. Now I am less versed on the media world, so there certainly might be some other pieces that they could have cleaned up, but it did set the stage for me to kind of lean into my screen and go, okay, well, hold on a second here. If we're getting to this point,
right,
there's a whole bunch of backstory, and I'd love to know what that is. Yeah. So was it used perfectly? I will say maybe not, but for me, it did sort of act as a catalyst to get back to a point where I wanted to learn more about what the story was.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you're going to get all kinds of flavors and wheretofores and whys. And the neat part is that it's all entertainment. Absolutely. And so again, that's the best part of taking all this stuff in. There's something else to talk about too. For those of you that have not seen this episode, obviously we're talking about an episode of Flashpoint. Obviously we're talking about something that involves a lot of crisis negotiation, but the quick snapshot of the program is this. There is essentially a gentleman that has robbed a bank. And we're going to leave out, I think, some of the meaty particulars, unless you guys bring them up specifically. But he's robbed a bank, and he's essentially been caught robbing the bank. And then the episode's hilarity unfolds. Right.
That's a quick snapshot to get all of you that either have no interest in watching the actual episode or aren't going to watch it because it's on Paramount or whatever your reason is. That'll get you started. And what we're going to jump into now are the actual specific things that we noticed inside the episode. Pat, you want to run us off?
So let's talk about the bank robbery, right? So obviously, we don't really get a lot of the story. We just know this guy goes in, robs a bank. It's kind of forced. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's kind of the whole thing is the premise is you find out this guy's needing money for some reason, whatever it may be, right? So that's his reasoning for robbing this bank, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Rob's bank goes wrong, which most bank robberies actually do go bad. I've never heard of too many bank robbers actually get away with it. So if you're thinking about robbing a bank, probably not going to work. Don't think about it. But yeah, so it's the bank robbery. Cops show up. Now they're barricaded with hostages, right? So then that's when we come into the thing that our SWAT teams, whatever you want to call them, SRTs, whatever, and our negotiators. And that's kind of what the groundwork for this episode. And then why we're talking about this episode, because me and Sean, obviously, we're negotiators.
So I just want to touch on a couple things there. I mean, I thought the show did a good job, as you said, Pat, identifying the fact that this guy was going in because he needed money. There was a very, very brief foreshadow, as you very aptly pointed out, when he's sitting there, you see him on the phone. Obviously, if I remember correctly, there's some numbers that are actually exchanged as far as what he might need. Right. And he realizes kind of with that heavy sigh, okay, well, I got to go do something. And, pulls out the gun and, you could almost hear the dun, dun, dun music happen at that point because you knew something was coming. And then, of course, you fast forward and now they're in the bank. The kickoff and the catalyst to the event itself, realistically, I guess it's as real as any bank robbery would be. I mean, it's one of those things that I don't think is well discussed by your school guidance counselor about saying, hey, if you want to rob banks, only 3 in 10 work well. Like, I don't know how that actually happens.
Right.
But for sure, when this all initiates and you see this actually start to begin, and then they get the call and obviously the troops are on their way, that to me was where I, again, sort of leaned in closer to my TV because like, okay, what are they doing? And if I can touch on a couple of things, if you're give me a little liberty on that. One of the other roles that I've had here is I was trained as an incident commander. So my brain went down 2 paths. One was the negotiating side, and the other one was on the public safety and the scene preservation side. And I was going, ooh, okay, had a couple of liberties taken. But with that being said, the way that they deployed and the fact that they're talking about the resources that are going to be required, especially on the negotiating side, was actually pretty true to form.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I think really comes to the forefront inside this episode too, every single time I saw the perp inside this episode, you could see that there was something else going on. This was not just a guy that was, hey, it's time to go rob a bank because I'm an asshole.
Right.
There was obviously something else going on that tortured soul. I don't know what. So thumbs up for, frankly, all of the acting with the exception of the Brad Pitt / dead movie star kid guy with the hair.
Oh yeah.
Every moment that we had a longing look at him trying to look dramatic is something we could have given back to the storytelling.
Yeah.
It's something again that I've been talking about for decades inside of Entertainment Review, where obviously hot man checkbox, gotcha. Obviously want to showcase him because he's likely either in another property, which if he is, I don't know. But again, all of that time that's a longing look, or there had to be at least a minute 45 that was dedicated to him looking far too close to a reticle
right
inside of the episode.
Yeah.
All of that time could have been better spent telling us more story about the tortured soul, or the lady who is also essentially also a tortured soul inside of this episode.
Yeah.
So there's one thing I actually want to touch on there that you brought up, Mike, and that's for anyone who either is in our field or is looking to get into it. And that you talked about the other thing going on, that the guy wasn't out there solely to rob a bank. And you kind of have to view it from 2 different perspectives. You've got the command perspective with, what's my problem? Well, I've got a bank robbery going on with a guy that we know is armed. And obviously, portions of this are going to be broadcast, or during the show they were broadcast showing what was actually happening. But second part, and this is really more on the negotiating side, is to the specifics of your point. What is the guy dealing with? And they did a really good job through the thread that the negotiator used of exactly that. Like he realized that this was a departure from what the guy's norm was.
Yeah.
This was a behavior that wasn't in keeping with his personality. And obviously, by the time we get to the end of the episode, we understand what's actually gone on. But I thought they actually did a pretty good job. And I want people to be mindful, if you happen to watch the episode, that really put yourself into the shoes of the negotiator and trying to figure out, okay, if I've got all my other things that I'm looking at as far as assessment goes and the probability of success, and I use success in the terms of getting people out, how many of those things are being contrasted by what this guy is actually dealing with? And if you're looking at that objectively, does it make sense? Not that they did a really good job actually painting that picture.
Yeah, and it's funny because they kind of first bring it up as, I guess there's some kind of serial bank robber that was going on at the same time, the Monday Morning Banner or whatnot. So that's who they're assuming this dude is. And I guess his last bank job, he actually killed 2 people. So that ups the stakes. But
Absolutely.
as you know, Sean, sometimes we get intelligence that isn't all the times really what's happening. So that's what they're going off of, thinking, oh, this is this guy. He just killed 2 people. He was a serial bank robber. And then actually when we start doing our due diligence and looking into this, we find out, oh, hold on a second. This isn't that guy. It's a totally different story. And this is what the story is. So, I mean, that happens a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, one of the things, again, from the role player inside of a crisis negotiator training set that I wanted to make sure I commented on, especially in a story like this, is that I think a lot of times people think that crisis negotiators are just simply like a smoothing over the cement to make sure that it's a clear piece of wet cement. When in reality, there's far more problem solving that's going on inside of just about every single crisis negotiation situation that I've ever participated in. Again, the concept for those of you that are curious is that while I'm hung up with people, I've hung up the phone with people, I can now watch and listen to them interact with their team. And you can literally listen to the entire crisis negotiation team surmise what's going on, quickly talk about the things that they garnered from the most recent interaction with the suspect, and then start to devise plans to move forward if someone isn't already coming up with them and then telling them which way their group's going to go. Again, the piece of problem solving is, I think, probably what I draw the most from inside of crisis negotiation, because sure, I'm the nutty fellow that you're talking down as a role player inside of crisis negotiation. True. But again, being the splash damage of getting all of the problem solving that happens inside of at least 20 people during a day of crisis negotiation is a lot of fun to be cage side to, because you by osmosis you take it in. And it's almost intoxicating, because you can see where there are glints of awesome inside the team, and then you can see the pieces that aren't yet polished. But then by the end of the scenario, and it's usually between an hour or 2 hours, you can start to see that everybody is polishing and improving because of the interaction of the team. It's very, very, very engaging.
So I just want to touch on one thing, and I think you did a good job sort of splitting the term problem solving. And I want to make sure that, especially for anyone who's watching this, the intent behind negotiating is, and you did a good job explaining the 2 different paths. We don't problem solve for our subjects. Our subjects, as a general rule, they know what their problem is. They likely know their way through it, but there's something that's impeding them getting there. There's something they have to deal with. So what you're really specifically talking about there, Mike, is what we call review and development of time. So that's our time offline. And that's where we as a group will sit down and say, okay, look, this is what's going on with this person's world right now. I think we really need to talk more about his military service. We better stay away from mom. Someone's got to be quarterbacking that time to making sure that, because time drags or actually moves by very quickly. I shouldn't say drags, it's the wrong term.
Right.
It speeds up really quickly when you're offline, because you're trying to strategize to find that perfect term. But what it really you're hitting on there is the need for that group of people to have some form of cohesion and synergy. And I realize that's one of those big managerial terms, but it comes down to the 4 parts of that team working together are so much more beneficial than 4 individual pieces all filling their role.
Yeah.
And so I think that was one of the things that was even touched on in the show a fair amount during the initial phase, when they're doing some of that flashback piece, when they're doing some of the training. They're working together as a team. And I realized that for the episode itself, the team was pretty compressed.
Right.
And I'm going to be honest with you, even some law enforcement agencies still are using those compressed teams where you might have 1 or 2 members who are actually SWAT trained or tactically trained who are doing the negotiating side. But I thought they did a good job of showing the need for a secondary voice. And throughout the episode itself, the primary, even though he was, I think he even made it the mention at one point, he was field training.
Yeah.
The other member, they were still having a conversation saying, you know what, I just don't buy the fact that this is what's going on with this guy. What am I missing? And you're always trying to bounce ideas off other people that are part of your team to make sure that you're finding your right path with the very clear knowledge that you need dissenting opinions now and again. If you have a team that is doing nothing but endorsing everything that person A says, you're really doing yourself a disservice. There needs to be a safe place for everyone to go, yeah, you know what? I'm not buying that because of these reasons. And I think it's this because of these reasons. And in the end, you put away your ego, say, yep, I think that's the best path for us to move forward. And you get back on the line with that person.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about teams too. We just got done talking with Gary Nesner, that is essentially, for those of you that aren't in crisis negotiation or haven't either heard or know of the word Waco because of your age, that was the guy that was at Waco that was running through that entire scenario. And inside of that, he actually talks it specifically about the television series, that the many television series that are featured, where they're showing a couple of people that are the crisis negotiators,
Right.
when in reality, there's a 10 to 15 person negotiator team that's enacting. And so again, the concept of, especially inside of crisis negotiation, that it really is a team element, is it's never been more real to understand the vitality, but then also the power of team play inside of crisis negotiation.
Yeah, I think they even kind of bring that up when going back to that training episode, right? The teams they're training, and that's important because you train as a team. What I thought was kind of interesting is the one concept they brought up. You see that the guy, he basically loses his cool because it has to do with the demand of, they want cocaine. And I think his reply was, I'm not giving you coke, ass, or something like that. And you could see he just totally loses his cool, right? But the purpose of that lesson was, listen, the only thing you can control in a negotiation is your own emotions, and you didn't even do that. So, I think there's some real reality to that. Is that's the stuff we preach and teach on, is, that's the first thing you have to control in negotiations, your own emotions. Hence, that's why we train, to show people that. So, I thought that was kind of interesting how they kind of went about that with the little training skit they did.
Yeah. What I also loved about watching it live, and again, why I'm really excited about being able to offer all of you the ability to watch us watch these things live in the future, is I love, especially as a professional podcaster, and really for all of my entire 20-year podcasting career, I love discovering light bulb moments, because every single scenario that I participate as a role player inside a crisis negotiation, there's no question. Very often it comes inside the debrief when we're analyzing what was going through. And it's typically, for me, the people like Pat, Sean, Gary McDougall, a number of other people that we have inside of the scenarios. That's usually where I get my light bulb moments. But I got to tell you, watching the teams work out problems and then discovering their light bulb moments while they're discovering their light bulb moments, man, it's juicy, and they showcase that inside this episode really, really well.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things that we talked about last night was there's a very, very strong adherence to the actual craft and practice of negotiating that was clearly demonstrated in this. And it went all the way back to, as Pat mentioned, when they're doing the training scenario. I mean, of course, there's some liberties taken. I mean, realistically, the physical proximity and the way they're dealing with guys, and I'll give a little bit away here, that you got a couple guys with a firearm, and they're 5, 7, 10 feet away from having this conversation. The reality is, from a law enforcement perspective, that's not going to happen, but it did make for good TV. Right. But what I did like was the recognition that reality-based training is the way that you have to do this. And sure, maybe this was a little bit too far, but from Pat's experience and my experience, I can assure you that the best way to train is as close to the reality of a deployment as you can get. Yeah. And what they really did there was, they were trying to invoke an emotional response from the negotiator. Yeah, in this circumstance, they got it. Right. Well, okay, that's the slap on the wrist, and let's not do that again. But one of the things that we as negotiators have to recognize are those self-assessment pieces where I would say that this guy actually, to steal a line from Jim Glennon, was, what is his piss-off potential? You know, they started poking and needling and they were, you know, very accusatory and aggressive towards him, and he snapped.
Yeah.
He had an emotional response, just like most of us would have. But as Pat said, as negotiators, you kind of have to take that entire ability or capacity to respond to somebody in a negative fashion to give them, like, you know, sort of the hand of the chest. And we actually have tools to use that we, like, from my perspective, and Pat, I don't know what your thought was on this, instead of that guy snapping, he could have used an iMessage, which is one of the tenets of our active listening skills. The guy is getting a demand that's, I'm not going to say nonsensical, but we know we're not going to give a guy illicit drugs or hard illicit drugs. Well, if that's the case, then could you have used an iMessage and said, you know, I find it really frustrating when you make these demands because I'm trying to work with you. That's one that's going to be out of my control. Like, he would have had that capability. And I mean, in a perfect world, it would have been great if they would have been able to incorporate little bits of that. But I still think, especially from that scenario up front and how it sort of foreshadowed and it was a precursor to where this was going, I thought that was a really good element that they put in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, let's move on to the next thing. Sean, what's next?
Well, you know, once they actually deploy to the scene, one of the challenges, and I talked to Pat about this operation last night, is, and I'm going to, again, sort of bridge that gap between incident command and negotiator, is they deploy. And one of the things I would have loved to have seen was, before he actually makes that first call in there, what was his intent? We talked really explicitly and openly and passionately about the fact that you need to have a plan before every contact with your subject.
Right.
You don't just do this, you know, throwing stuff at the wall and see what sticks. It's like, okay, what do we know right now? And if our negotiator looks to his secondary and says, okay, this is what I understand. Are we in agreement? Yep. Okay, great. This is what I want to gain in that first contact. And it may be as simple as, I want him to pick up the phone. Great. That's fine. You have a plan. And that was one thing that we didn't get. Now, much to your point though, Mike, is, you know, you're dealing with 43 to 47 minutes. Like, we don't have that time for something that's probably going to be deemed to be pretty boring. But if you want to adhere to the craft as much as you can, that would be something I would have liked to see. But what's your thought on that, Pat?
Yeah, I agree. I think it was one of those things that's just time. They didn't have enough time. But what I did like, though, is when they were making calls, when they were off, like you said earlier, they had that brainstorming session, though. Even though he's supposedly field training this guy, they're still having that conversation of, well, what do you think? You know, where are you at, kind of a thing, that's what we do offline. We have a lot of, no matter if I'm a 20-year guy and there's a 1-year person, we still want their feedback, because they may have heard something that we didn't, or something that resonates with them. Hey, why don't we try this? Hey, that's a great idea. Think about that.
And I'll do you one better. Very often, and this has come up several times, especially depending on how old the people are inside of the teams that we're training inside of our sessions. It actually turns into where the younger people that don't have the decades of experience, they're going to have some latch into either pop culture or social media or some new tech that perhaps the people who are older or have more experience just simply do not have any ass in seats time at all to comprehend what might be being said. It also works in reverse. The sample I'll give, and I don't think this is giving out too much. There are segments inside of a series of our training sets where I'm using the numbers 8675309. And for those of you that are young enough, that those numbers mean nothing. Well, throw it into Google real quick, because I'm not going to give you what the answer is inside of here. For those of you that are old enough, you know instantly what that is referring to.
Yep.
And I've got to tell you, when I first devised that, it was just kind of I was trying to think of a number that I knew I would always remember, because if they went back and asked me what my number was, I wanted to make sure that I was giving them something. But it's really become a beacon inside of every single training scenario, because I can instantly watch all of their faces when I say the number, and I can see the light bulb moment above some of them.
Who knows and who doesn't?
Right, exactly, instantaneously. And so again, it's another piece of where they they were able to just snatch little tiny pieces of the things that all three of us work and use inside of our scenario trainings. And I really enjoyed that.
One of the other things, if I can just touch on for a second, was it comes down to team roles, and there are challenges with teams where you have cross-trained SWAT or tactical operators that are negotiators. So I'm going to kind of leave my soapbox off the episode here, but what I did see was at one point there, the primary negotiator is actually creating what we would call boards. He actually had something where he's trying to get information that he is going to find important to be front and center in front of him. And that's incredibly important because under the stress of an active negotiation, and let's be frank, I mean, you've got a barricaded guy with a firearm and a bunch of hostages. I don't think you're going to find a negotiation that's going to be more challenging. Like, this is the penultimate. We've hit the pinnacle.
That has bodies on his jacket. That's the other piece where again, for those that don't understand for those that don't understand the color of what happens when not only outright violence, but even the threat of outright violence, that instantly changes the complexion of anything inside a crisis negotiation. It's not just drama. It instantly takes the course of the way the ship is going inside of a crisis negotiation team, and it turns it in a completely different direction. It's also one of the reasons why inside of the crisis negotiator trainings that we have, we are encouraged to not instantly solicit and enact any kind of violence, because obviously the switches would get flipped and it instantly turns into something completely different that takes the chance of getting ass and seats time to train as a crisis negotiator in a crisis negotiator team. It instantly takes it off the table, and so the scenario would be over.
Yeah.
And I love that they even bothered addressing that inside of this, because again, most modern day, especially American television audiences, they just can't stomach being talked to intelligently until they can. And that's what's really frustrating is you'll find programs that not only they delve into not only the deeper social structures of what happens inside of, say, a police drama. I'm going to always bring up The Shield because The Shield is one of my favorite television programs. But they'll also give you many of those telltale signs of deeper, more involved storytelling that you may not find out an answer to for seasons later on inside the show.
Right.
But they deliver it anyway. So it's either a question inside of the person who's watching mind, or the people that have some experience of what's going on inside of the craft of being a police officer or being on a team of police officers inside of what might be a dicey or an even bad Rampart-like element. You'll start to identify, I see what's going on there. I wonder what they're going to do with that. And if they bother to do any of that inside of a series like this, man, thumbs up. What do we got next, Pat?
Let's see. What were we talking about? So we're diving into team stuff, right? So they do bring on a police psychologist. However, they probably use her probably not the best of ways throughout the episode, right? She starts out as the coach, I think, at one point, and then she actually goes out and starts interviewing the guy's wife, which obviously we're not going to use our psychologist to do that. But that's kind of an important aspect is, you know, we find these different pieces of the puzzle, and something, maybe it's new to some people, it's kind of been around for a while, but adding that other tool, that police psychologist, who in reality is usually just going to be there listening into the negotiation and just helping us out on that downtime and stuff like that, that they're not going to be all these other pieces that they kind of threw into it during this episode.
I think, the fact that they introduced that position is wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, it really shows the evolution and the professionalism of negotiating work. And there is that reliance on people who have an outside perspective. I think there's a huge challenge, I would say, in dealing with police psychologists or psychological consultants, depending whatever term you want to use for it. But if you're going to use a psych consultant, I don't personally, and this is where I will get on my soapbox, I don't care what the person's diagnosis is with all of the nuanced pieces. I don't really care if they have schizoaffective disorder with paranoid tendencies and a proclivity. Help me. I'm a knuckle dragger. Tell me up front, okay, you know what? you're going to have to play into this person's ego, or you're going to have to keep your conversation really short with this person because their ability to interpret and access all the things that they need to deal with what they're going through right now are pretty limited.
Yeah,
that's what I think the biggest thing is just get those snippets of information that we can internalize and put into practice.
Yeah, there's two things I want to bring up here. First is that I too am elated that they bothered to use what is essentially a counselor. It reminds me very much of the concept of, remember when Star Trek The Next Generation was absolutely coming out of left field, throwing a counselor into one of the bridge seats? What the hell is that, right? It's exactly the same concept. The captain would want to be able to tap not only someone who is empathic and can read other people's feelings and minds, they'd want that, sure, but they want somebody that's got far more in the way of touchy, feely, emphatic things inside the realm of decision making. I love that. The second thing is that inside of crisis negotiator teams, over the course of probably the last, again, I've been doing it now for 4.5 years. Over the course of the last couple of years, maybe a little bit less, what we have seen is that there's been an infusion of taking mental health professionals and folding them into the crisis negotiator teams. And so it's where I nod, but then I also kind of shake my head, where I can literally hear exactly what I've heard inside of some of the crisis negotiator training sessions that we've had from that lady, if not the same voice from that lady. To spin in on what Sean was talking about, though, it really does benefit, especially people inside of the mental health aspects, to be able to act more like a mechanic, not a mechanic where the mechanic goes, okay, so it looks to me like your brake lines are severed. We're going to have to fix those. And then remember, when you start traveling again, you want to tap on your brakes to make sure that they're working. Okay, we want to start with the last part first, mostly because that's the piece that we need. The why it's broken, we can get to that, but we need to know how we can make things go well now versus needing to know the entire history and the bedlam and the stuff that we don't know. We don't need to know the why. We need to know how to interact and then make sure that what might be impacting them isn't going to do that. That's the big thing about the mental health professional set.
Right. So another thing I think they did pretty good of just showing the different things that negotiators can actually do. Now, this is a little far-fetched. I say a little, but we're distractions sometimes for tactical. Maybe they have to make movement. Maybe they have to do something. We may do something. Maybe we're just going to that phone call we're going to ring in. But I think they went a little too far on this one with the, hey, I'm going to, by the way, we'll talk about the annoying bank alarm too. I'm going to make the bank alarm that sounds like a sub diving go off to cover the explosive of the wall, right? Because like that's gonna totally like not know, right? I mean, so thoughts on that one, Sean?
Okay, so I'm going to cover off again that straddling piece. As an incident commander, I looked at that and I'm pretty sure my eyebrows hit my really receding hairline. Like, whoa, that's interesting. The challenge behind the show itself, and I really would want to just caution anybody, is that the role of the primary negotiator is much more defined and confined compared to what we see in the episode. Like, he's doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And really, he would have one job, which is you're going to talk to the subject when you're offline. You're going to sit down. You're going to be helped by your team and supported. You're not going to get all this other stuff going on. Now, with that being said, though, it does give a glimpse into the thought processes of a command structure and a team, because most teams, and unfortunately we kind of have to step off of what we experienced in this episode, most teams are going to have, or most response are going to have a SWAT team, have a negotiating team, and someone making decisions above them. And so the negotiating team and the SWAT team are going to bring information up to the top, and they're going to have a conversation about what has to happen. Hey, we'd like to gain some ground here. In order to do that, we need to put a hole in the wall. Well, okay, negotiators, can you help with if that's what tactical wants? And there's discussion. That's great. That's obviously 100% abbreviated for the purposes of media, but they're having a conversation. He kind of introduces this. I'm like, where's this going? Next thing you know,
right,
they're porting a wall. Now, I'm not sure if this is a seismic difference between the US and Canada, But I can assure you, in Canada, if someone blows a hole through the wall and you're standing on that floor, you're going to feel it.
Yeah.
So, poetic license, whatever you want to use, dramatic license, I get it. That was one part where I kind of did the not so sure. And one of the other things, Pat, that I caught all the way through this is uniforms and protective equipment. I realize that we want to look at all their beautiful faces and stuff like that. You're not going to be breaching anything. You're not going to be on a front line without some form of protective gear, especially on your head.
Yeah.
Like the introduction of a helmet, I think would have been perfectly reasonable through this. And I don't think would have taken much away from the show, although the one guy with good hair, who I'm clearly jealous of, that maybe would have been, a bit of a slam towards him. But
yeah,
I really thought that was the one thing I got a little far.
Right.
But with that being said, the introduction of the alarm and that, you do have to sometimes think about things a little bit more creatively and outside the box to get our mission accomplished.
And then that leads us up to the gunshot, right? Bam, gunshot. Now all of a sudden here, now it's just a SWAT entry, which again, a little bit comical, like you said,
a lot comical.
They come in with no gear. I mean, they have no shields, nothing.
Yeah,
they got their MP5s. The flashbang they throw looked like a smoke grenade I got at 4th of July. And I'm not sure if that's what they were trying to do. And then you get to the point where, everybody gets out. Now we got the hostage and the hostage taker. We got the stare down, right? And then we just pack up our stuff and go away.
Yeah.
Right?
And that was the thing. And I actually apologize. I can't remember exactly where it was within the episode, but the negotiator starts to use some 100% accurate terms. And I was impressed with that. And Pat and I talked briefly last night about the fact that whoever they used as a consultant on this actually gave them probably a ton of information that they were able to sort of piecemeal in as it fit into the storyline. But what you have to realize, and this is just, I think, a statement for negotiators, for the public, whatever it is, our number one job is keeping the hostages or the victims safe and alive. That is what our job is. Our safety priorities, they have to be number one. And so when they initiated the response, as fictitious as it may be, it is what would happen. Now, said the way it looked and played out, please don't take me down that road. But someone's going to have to make a decision that, hey, things are going bad. We need to intervene now.
Yeah, one of the things I want to talk about too, when we talk about consultants, it's clear, obviously, that this show, and again, I've only watched this one episode of it, but this show for this episode had a consultant of some kind that is in crisis negotiation. 100%.
Yeah.
That being said, I always tell people the cautionary tale of another program that is actually the front end feature and only podcast I've ever initiated and then subsequently stopped doing. It was a podcast for a television program called The Following. And it was The Following Podcast. And The Following was a television show also on Fox. For those that aren't familiar with me and my predilection inside of podcasting, I was the official fan podcast for 24, the 24 podcast on Fox. And so we decided to do another Fox program because why not? The audience is already there. They'll glom onto this because 24 is over. Kick ass. Thumbs up, right? Wrong. Giant thumbs down, because after episode 4 of The Following, apparently all the consultants that were there, they went out for a permanent lunch. It was absolutely farcical and got even more so as the episodes away from episode number 4 continued.
Even Kevin Bacon couldn't say that one.
Oh, it was. I so wanted it to be great because, again, I love me Bacon. I love me Kevin Bacon outright. But there is nothing. Dinosaurs being inserted onto that could not have possibly saved that show. And so again, what I'm emphasizing here is that the nature of bringing in a consultant, man, way thumbs up. I love it when it works out. I just don't like it when they kind of showed up or they stayed for 35 minutes. and then they just kind of leave the director and the production staff to their avails, because what's going to happen is you're going to get the explosive breach with the cover. What? I don't know. Shit. Blow that shit up. Who cares? The answer is the audience will care.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of them either not taking on or listening to the feedback that they'd get.
Yeah. I wish, I think Gary even brought this up, right? You sell your book rights. At the end of the day, you only have so much say, right? I think the same thing goes with being a consultant. At the end of the day, I could be an expert in negotiation. I could tell you, hey, this is the way we do it. They may not listen to us though, right?
Yeah, true.
Because that's just the way it is. But I think if Hollywood would start listening more to these experts and put on a better production, I think it'd be more viable. Like, oh, that actually looks more real. It's not the fake, I want to say Hollywood bullshit, right?
Yeah.
I think they'd have a lot more to it if they actually did listen to more of these consultants or hired better ones. I mean, whatever you want to say.
And I know Pat and I were talking last night about actually trying to figure out who the consultant was on this. But again, if you're just using the context of what's out there for mass media as far as law enforcement shows go, this one was actually, especially on our little nuanced niche portion of it, was actually pretty true to reality. And I give them credit for that. I mean, they had to do a couple of things, especially because you only have so many major characters. You couldn't deploy a team of 4. And would you have had the primary negotiator do some of the things he did? Probably not. But you don't have all these other, characters and members of your team that you can pull in to do those things that in reality we would have on scene. So I will give them maybe an A for effort and a B- for performance, because there's always going to be a few detractions and so on. But in the end, really, I was impressed with how close they were. And what I also found is when the negotiator would call in, he used some really good strategies, I thought, in just reestablishing the relationship and the conversation. I never found him to be preachy. And these are a lot of the things that we would be somewhat critical of. He was never preachy. He was never problem solving. He was very empathic in the way that he approached the subject. And the wording is going to be a little bit skewed here, but he basically said, like, this isn't like you.
Right.
And the guy was very agreeable to that, because he came down to really getting down to the identity of the subject in the circumstance. And of course, then the show takes us in some directions to understand why that may be the case.
Right.
But it's a pretty bold statement to make. And it's something where he actually did what in our world would be a really good summary on more than one occasion. And he encapsulated what was going on in this guy's life and gave it back to him.
And I was going to bring up that point was, I think once they found out the information of who this guy really is, and then found out what the backstory is, oh, he's got this wife with dementia and she's in this hospital and he just got fired and blah, blah, blah. But then how they used that and the negotiator threw that into that next phone call with that great summary you were talking about.
Yep.
That's real. That's stuff we really do. And I think that's where I really was like, you spot on. That's exactly what it looks like. And that's about as good as you could get, I thought.
Yeah, good. Let's press on. What's next?
The blonde head goofball with this initiate Stockholm syndrome stuff. Do we want to go off that, or?
Well, there were. See, and I was kind of curious what your perspective was. Was that Stockholm syndrome, or was that just human relationship?
Human relationship, 100%.
I think he was. I think what happened is with what happens a lot is people don't know what the hell really Stockholm is. They throw that shit out. Initiate Stockholm. Let's just build a human relationship. That's what we're, and let's build a human relationship.
Hold on. Do you guys remember that? I know you guys remember the movie Die Hard, but there's exactly what's happening inside of that news segment where the guy goes, Stockholm's, no, it's Sweden.
Yeah.
It's almost as comical as that, except that there's no hilarity. It's missing the back end of the joke or something.
I think that's what happens a lot is you get all these technical terms in the negotiation where like, where can we insert Stockholm syndrome, right? Because we need that in there to make it look good. So that's what I think they did with that. And instead of just, hey, let's just build that human relationship between the hostage taker and the hostage. No, we had to sound smarter, which unfortunately you didn't.
Right. I just, as that scene ended, I want to go, no, Finland, you dick.
Well, the worst part behind that for me was that when they're having the conversation sort of around that time in the show, there was this passage, like there's the human relationship. She understands a bit more about where he's coming from. He understands a bit more about where she's coming from. They both speak their piece. They may not be on the same page, but they're using an empathic view of conversation. And they're basically taking each other's truths and going, oh, okay, I didn't quite realize that. And oh, I didn't realize where that put you, but this is what I had to do. That is the most productive form of conflict resolution you're ever going to find.
Yeah.
And it was done in the absence of the negotiator at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was cool to see.
I love that you're bringing that up, because again, it plays into what, especially again, to go to an American modern day audience, somewhere inside of the milieu of what is created as what an American or what an audience can stomach is the fact that, look, if you've got a couple of professionals trying to explain why things work, man, that's never going to work. When in reality, I know the three of us as professionals that work inside of crisis negotiation circles, that's what we get the most out of. That's what we as professionals are doing all of this for.
Right.
Is to get the chemistry set cooking and then surmise things because of our interactions that instantly latch onto the curiosities that we don't yet know. And I think it's disingenuous to think that nobody inside of an audience watching behind either the boob tube, a digital screen, or your cell phone can't get it. I call bullshit all over that. It doesn't work that way.
No, I mean, the part for me that where that led to was an interesting, again, that you talked about foreshadowing. I hate to use the term again, but there was some stuff there right as they're figuring things out. It's like, well, how is this going to resolve? And where my brain went to was she basically, I guess, foresees what's about to happen here, knows what he needs. And I use that term again so loosely with the way that it plays out, but she buys into his end game and plan.
Yeah.
And I'm watching, I didn't fully understand until way later in the show when they start talking about insurance and stuff. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. So going back, you have to, as a viewer, you have to realize that they had some other discussion there that really got into some deeper things that, you know, the viewing public didn't see. So I was like, okay, that's actually, you know, a pretty interesting little piece of writing and all that.
Yeah. So then let's fast forward to now we're using our police psychologist to go interview the wife who's at this retirement wherever she's at. So now all of a sudden his demand, right? We talk about demand. He threw a couple demands out there. He wanted money first off, but now his demand is he wants his dementia wife on the phone, right? And what was that? I don't know, 5 seconds we thought about it, and let's get her
in line.
Yeah.
Before he did that, though, he started talking a little bit about what he thought some of the consequences might be. And one of the things, and Pat and I would probably roll over our, collective graves here about that is a really dangerous thing to do,
huge,
especially without any form of consultation.
Right.
But what was interesting behind it was, I wish they would have done a little bit more to preface. And I think they could have thrown in there. So for those in the industry and or those potentially outside of the industry, that would be the use of a third-party intermediary. And in that circumstance, when he says, I want to talk to my wife, and with the trajectory of his day, I don't know about you, Pat, but I had a pretty strong clenching feeling. I'm like,
not a good idea.
That is not going anywhere good.
Yeah.
But the problem with critical incident work is that at some points you're looking at, quite frankly, you're looking at a shit sandwich. You just hope to find one's got mayo on it.
Right.
That's the one you got to pick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're like, okay, I got to save the hostage or victim's life. In order to do that, is this my out? And it's pretty unpalatable, but maybe that's the right decision.
But that decision is going to take us, it's going to go down a long ways, right? We're going to stall number one. Hey, we don't know where your wife is, right? Right. I think they could have played more into that a little bit more.
I would have liked to have seen more of that. Again, the concept of, for those that don't know what a TPR is, Sean, explain what a TPR is real quick.
So I'm going to sort of branch that into two pieces. So a TPI is the use of a third party, so a non-related individual as a rule, to try to communicate with your subject to gain some form of influence. This is often somebody in their life who they have either potentially an intimate relationship with, a friend, could be a lawyer, could be a priest, could be a former coach, somebody who can impart some level of rapport because of that pre-existing relationship, and hopefully start to give them some influence in there. But they're dangerous, and they're dangerous depending on how you use them. Based on, in this circumstance, the guy's like, I want to talk to my wife, and he's getting pretty down on himself, and I think he's seeing some really negative things coming in his future. So we're often not wanting to not only traumatize our subject and cause them more grief potentially, but we really don't want to impact that third party. And so what we'll often use, and this is that secondary piece, is a third party recording. And the world has shrunk with the advent of a cell phone. And we can get a third party recording from anywhere in the world at a moment's notice, quite frankly. And one of the practices that I would certainly adhere to is, because you never know when somebody might have some influence on your subject, I would try to get third party recordings from everybody. You know, anybody who is on scene when you get there, I would grab them. We would have a little bit of a debrief to figure out if this is an appropriate person, do a bit of vetting, and it'd be like, you know, talk to the mic. And we have a sort of a specific way that we would try to formulate them, and I won't go into that in depth, but we get 15 of them, whatever the number is. And as you go through the negotiation, you realize, okay, Pat, no, that relationship isn't strong. We're just going to shelve that one. Yeah. Mike, not that strong. We're going to shelve that one. Oh, but that Gary guy, he's got some influence, this guy. Yeah. Well, lo and behold, I've got this in my back pocket. So what they did in the show was they went and they tried to, you know, they brought the wife into the fold with the psych consultant, which is one of the things that Pat and I talked about. You're never going to send a psych consultant out to do the bidding of the negotiating or even the policing world on her own. But she's there, again, some artistic license, and the wife with dementia speaks to the husband. Good, bad, and different, not something I would adhere to or suggest, but it did reflect that human emotion and connection that they had. And at the end of it, Pat, I'm not sure if you remember this or not, he said kind of my two most damning words that I heard as far as what was going to end up happening at the end. And he said, I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah.
And he apologized to her. And I'm like, oh God.
That's not, I've heard never that a good before. Thing, right?
Never goes well.
No.
Which is, again, Mike, to your point, that's why we're super careful in the way that we use TPIs.
Yeah. And I had no idea, one, that TPIs would be used. And so I thought, okay, well, we're going to get, you know, Mike's wife on the phone to talk to him. Okay. And Pat, why doesn't that work out usually? Can you explain that for us real quick?
Well, I'll give you a good example. Here's a horror story. I'm not going to name the agency, but one of our fellow instructors has a horrible TPI story. Guys, he's with his, I guess it's his wife, ex-wife, soon to be whatever. They had domestic whatnot. He's holding her at gunpoint. So they decide, hey, let's get his best friend to do a TPI. They have a great relationship, right? Best friend, get a TPI. Let's have him call in. Well, unbeknownst, and it wasn't really found out till they did a lot more digging, was the wife was having an affair with the best friend. Hence, this is what caused this whole situation. Now, can you imagine this? You're in there with your wife, and the guy who had the affair, which caused this, is now calling you in to try and influence you, right? Yeah, bad, right? So that's the dangers of using third parties if you don't do good homework. But the other thing is maybe this is his best friend. You still don't know how that person's going to react,
right?
So it's dicey.
More importantly, being able to gauge the emotional abilities of someone to latch onto somebody who is obviously in emotional crisis. There is no thermometer for that, and so again, it's where, oh, I see that you've held up another bank and you might kill someone else. Why don't you just kill yourself? Okay, well, if that's the person that's talking live on the phone, you had absolutely no ability to try and sway that in any different direction. And so the actual recording is something that would be used. Right. And again, when I first started jumping into crisis negotiation, I didn't understand any of that. I'm like, why don't you just have him talk to him? I mean, that clearly that'll help talk him down. And I again, that barrier of having something that will help somebody versus the question mark of whether it might help somebody is something that also gets rifled throughout the team like a ping pong ball, so that you can kind of gauge it from more than one perspective. And I love that because it gets back into team play.
Yeah. And it's kind of one of those things where the team decision, obviously team leader has overall, but everybody has input in. What do you think? Is this going to be something good? It's a great thing to talk about is when the team has that and that discussion they have. I remember several of them where we purposely, it's a training thing. We purposely give them a bad recording, and hopefully they listen to that. Number one, listen to it, but then you hear the people, oh, that's horrible. We're not going to use that. But then there'll still be that one person in the group.
Well, it's good.
Wasn't too bad, right? But
that'll work.
But then the group's like, no way, right?
So I want to touch on two real quick things there. One is the use of a TPI, like an actual face-to-face or an over the phone. I mean, that is gut check time for your team leader. I mean, a TPR, quite frankly, they're fairly low risk.
Right.
If you try it and it doesn't work, well, what have you lost? Not a whole lot. The ability to actually vet somebody and get down to the level of confirmation that this person does not have, the relationship where they were sleeping with the guy's wife, or you get a teacher to come on and they talk to the kid, or a younger person, they find out that the teacher sexually assaulted them. Like there's this whole gamut of things that you try to avoid. But one of the other things, and this is very much a logistical thing, and it changes in your perspective where you are in your organization, is if that person is working on behalf of you, if you say to that TPI, hey, you're going to work for us here. We need you to get on the phone and we need you to establish these things with your subject, and it goes bad, you now potentially own the mental well-being, and in case the physical well-being of that TPI. And that, I can promise you, is not something that you want to trifle with.
Right.
Because I've lived it. I've been there, like, wow, I did not expect that to have that elicit that response from somebody. We need to be very, very careful with this person.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've changed that kind of across Canada in the way that we deal with them, just to make sure that the right level of decision making is making that determination.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break here during the WhatCopsWatch.com focus on Flashpoint Season 1, Episode 5. We'll be right back.
Wouldn't it be cool if your advertising could last forever? It can, with perpetual advertising. Here's how it works. Magazine, radio, and television ads are efforts that people might see or hear once, and then they're lost forever. Perpetual advertising provides you with the chance for repeat exposure and replayability weeks, months, even years after it's originally inserted inside a podcast. So even if your advertising is included in a podcast years ago, those efforts are still impactful, providing you with true return on investment, real impact, thanks to perpetual advertising. Are you ready to change the way you and your company or organization advertises? Find out more and launch a unique perpetual advertising effort now by visiting twoguystalking.com/sponsors.
Have you got a cool voice? Do you like to act? Are you quick when it comes to thinking on your feet? Want to help propel the future of training crisis negotiators across the globe and foster the future of law enforcement? We need you. It doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter what's on your plate. We want your voice to help us evolve the way that law enforcement interacts and succeeds when it comes to crisis negotiation. Ready to get started? Access BlueBaggersProject.com and start your role-playing voice adventure today. BlueBaggersProject.com. That's BlueBaggersProject.com.
Thought about a career in voiceover? Need a great, cost-effective on-hold message for your organization or business? Don't know where to start? Check out The Voice Farm, your one-stop shop for voiceover needs. Check it out now by accessing The Voice Farm at voicefarmers.com and see what difference can be made with a company that is truly outside the box. From the Voice Box, voicefarmers.com. That's voicefarmers.com.
Editing podcasts can be rough. Everyone knows that you'll spend at least double the time you use creating the podcast when editing it. Then there's the control freak factor and the gotta get it right the first time factor. And well, it's time to shove all that out the door and make your podcast soar with the Editor Core. The The Editor Corps is a talented, experienced team of podcast editors that have edited tens of thousands of hours of podcast content, and they're ready for yours now. Check out editorcore.com because it's time to make your podcast soar. Editorcore.com. That's editorcore.com.
Everyone, welcome back to WhatCopsWatch.com. Our focus this time is on Flashpoint, Season 1, Episode 5. Who's George?
So we find out who George is. Poor George is. That's the other thing is George gets laid off from he's the head security guy. So
Yeah.
7 layoffs, and they decide, hey, let's lay off the head security. Hence, let's have a bank robbery. But we're digressing now. But so that's what George is. George's get laid off. His wife is suffering from dementia. He decides he's going to rob a bank because he's got to pay bills, right? Because he has no money now. So that's kind of where we're at. Let's talk about the ending. Dramatic ending. We left off at he talks to the wife. Basically, he says his goodbyes. I think a key thing that I picked up on realizing this was going to go bad was he put his mask back on. I don't know if you picked up on that or not, Sean, but he puts his mask back on. I think if he would have came out and given up, I don't think he would have wanted to wear the mask. So I think that was a little bit of a telling us, hey, this ain't going good. He puts his mask back on. So,
and for me, when I was watching that, and one of the things that Pat and I are always looking at is assessment, risk assessment. Where do you think this is going? And I think as a viewer of the show, that was one of those puckering moments. You're like, oh, this isn't going to go well. And then this is where I'm going to get a little bit critical of the show is when they actually do exit. And there's a conversation between the negotiator and the subject. And it breaches probably every rule of policing and intervention that you would ever see. And that was the only part for me that was a little bit hard to swallow. I think they could have done it in a bit of a different way and still sold the characterization.
right.
But ultimately, first off, and I'm going to be very open, is that negotiators or police officers, and obviously we're citizens, we're never going to put ourselves into that level of risk. And so at that point, you're like, oh boy, I'm not quite buying this fully. The resolution, and I won't go into the full resolution, although I'm sure the listening audience can probably do some connecting of the dots.
Deductive thinking, yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
But you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. And things end up resolving. One of the pieces, and Pat, I do want to talk about this, and I apologize if I'm getting a little bit ahead of things, is at the very end, again, we circumvent a whole bunch of investigative things by the fact there's some stuff that's gone on.
Right.
But the primary and the secondary have a conversation at the end. And what I really liked about that was the level of humanity of that conversation.
Yeah.
One of the things that is overlooked and I think really misunderstood from the outside of law enforcement is the impact on your mental health and well-being of doing any form of policing work, never mind critical incident work like this. And again, I'm not going to give away the ending, but there's a real level of humility and humanity by the primary. And he kind of opens up his soul, which is something that Hollywood they don't really endorse.
No.
And I would say in many cases, they actually fictitiously gloss over and say that everybody after whatever kind of day you've had, you go home, everyone gets knuckles all the way around and you're good.
Right.
Oh, no, that or they'll actually swing it in the other direction where because you are manic, because you are essentially on the ragged edge, you're ready to be the best police officer in this film. And it's terrible.
Yeah.
Because in addition to giving the public something to look at and say, see, you're also perpetuating that stereotype. Chief Chris, who is one of our mainline partners in crime here at WhatCopsWatch.com, his favorite movie is Lethal Weapon, and I love watching that movie. But I also love it because while watching the movie, I've had some of the best adult light bulb moments I've ever had in my life watching the film with him.
Yeah.
Because you instantly understand that there are pieces of that movie that instantly paint a great picture of policing. And then there are other ones that are absolutely abhorrent and instantly give the public all of the pictures you do not want to paint for anybody that is inside of the public about policing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I thought that the ending where they had the two sitting down and just seeing the humanity of the primary negotiator. We don't want to give up the ending, but just seeing the weight of these incidents, that's real stuff, right? You get done with an incident, the bank robbery, hostages. I mean, that's heavy stuff. Yeah. And when that's done and gone, everybody goes about their business, and then the cops have that to kind of like dwell upon of, that's a day, and then guess what? Tomorrow's another day, and you could have something exactly the same happen, or it could be totally different. And that's just the grind that we had. And especially as negotiators, it could go from day to day to day, not good inning to good innings, and you just kind of roll through it sometimes. So
one of the things I don't think is ever explained or really shown to the public is the mental exhaustion that comes along with being involved in a negotiation. Like, I know for myself, I've been involved in a couple where even if they only lasted 3-4 hours, I've gone home and slept for a day after that, because you are absolutely spent. And in this circumstance, I can't imagine that our primary would have been dealing with that level of emotional arousal for whatever period of time. Granted, in this circumstance, it was 43 minutes and it was all done. Right. But the impact on people is enormous. And it was, I think, the first glimpse that I have ever seen in mass marketed television where it was like, yeah, it's a challenge, and we have to accept that and sort of champion the fact that he was open. That was a great ending for that show.
Yeah. So again, like we said, we're not going to spoil it for you. That's why we want you to watch it. So let's talk about good and bads. Go ahead, Mike.
I love a lot of what we see here. There's a story I'm going to share. It doesn't tell you how the episode's going to end, but it deals with mature content. And the gist is this. There was a scenario where Pat and the role-playing entourage and I took over a live defunct bank. And I was the bank robber with a bomb. And inside the bank, obviously it is a defunct bank. So there's very little in there. We brought in some lawn chairs just so we could sit down. But there was very little else inside the bank. However, we had who I'll call a handler. And I'll call him Handler Josh. Josh is a member of our local law enforcement who's moved on to really cool things recently. And I love Josh because Josh is a big picture thinker, like hardcore. Pat, you've known him forever. And Josh is a huge, big picture thinker. And I kept wondering why he would grab me by the scruff of my jacket and jerk me out of where I was standing. And he did it 2 or 3 times. And I obviously, I'm not going to question a member of local law enforcement doing something, right? Until he did it the 3rd time. And I go, hey, man, can I do something different, or what am I doing? He's like, I don't know how clear to explain this to you, but when you poke your head out, you're making your head available to be shot off. And so that's why I'm jerking you out of perspective. Yep. And again, there's a number of different times inside of this episode that really gets Mike Wilkerson goat, because again, especially now having worked with law enforcement for as long as I have, with not only What Cops Watch, but everything else inside of my entertainment review set, trying to explain to people when the real life and the entertainment pieces start to gnash. Very often entertainment's going to lead towards entertainment because it has to be entertainment, right? There are some daring programs that will do it the other way. This one did not do that. And so that's a big ding for me. That's definitively in the bads, and probably my only really bad thing. The other one was kind of nitpicky. Again, for those of you that don't know firearms, I'm a firearms instructor. And what you instantly see when the young, wonderfully haired dude guy is holding a rifle, he's holding the rifle 1/4 of an inch from his eyeball. And so if he ever had to pull or accidentally pulled the trigger, he would instantly give himself not only a black eye, but like the largest ever black eye that he would never live down inside of the SWAT entourage and probably career. Yeah. And so that obviously that's a nitpick from a guy that knows firearms as well as the scenarios that we're talking about. What I really loved about this is that there's nothing in this where I go, fake.
you look at all of it, and the production design that's inside of this program is very high key. Everything down to the frickin' building that they're in. Hey, look at that bank.
Yeah.
It literally says CCB on it. It obviously, everywhere that they were filming looked like it either could have been a bank or it was a bank. In fact, you're going to laugh again, that scenario that Pat and I and the role-playing entourage pulled off. It was in a bank. It was a bank. All the names have been torn off, but the Bearcats, the drones, the robots, all the snipers that were surrounding the place, everything was in front of a bank. And we even had signage outside that said, "Hey, don't panic. It's just training going on locally." And again, when you can get that level of realism inside of a television program, I really, really enjoy that. The other big negative that I usually give things like this is just that, goddamn, we're taking that 4, 6, 8 hour scenario and smash it into 43 minutes to a pulp. They give some really great segments inside of this, though. But again, the time crunch is always just a bear inside of stuff like this. Pat, what do you got?
No, so yeah, I want to say the goods, like we kind of nitpicked. Obviously, whoever their consultant was picked up on a lot of good stuff. Just the nuances of what we do. I liked, again, like you said, the settings. To me, it looked real. Like that's a bank. It's on a city street.
All of it.
All that stuff was good stuff. Overall, that was a lot of the goods. Some of the bads was just a little, and this is going to be nitpicky, but okay, so she fires this guy. She's the bank manager, but she doesn't recognize his voice. The bank procedure, again, the submarine alarm goes off, bang, and everybody's screaming and yelling, and that hopefully, I mean, I don't know, maybe you guys do that in Canada, I don't know, but in the US, hopefully they would have a silent alarm, and like it'd be more controlled. Like, hey, there's a dude robbing a bank, everybody start filing away out the back door. Let's do it stealthily, right? And not to hit the panic alarm and fires breathing down and all that other stuff. Other than that,
Nutty.
The one thing I will say, and I don't know what it is with you Canadians, but why the hell do you guys wear your sergeant stripes upside down? I mean, for fuck's sakes, can you at least put them on the right way?
Right.
And that's the thing that always just, but it is Canada, so yeah. But that's what I
that's
get.
the rule. So I guess I get to wrap it up here. So I'll be
you are Mr. Wrap Up, yes sir.
I'll be privileged in that. So overall, I enjoyed the episode, and I really think it did a fair amount of service to law enforcement and specifically to crisis negotiation. 100%, Mike, the nitpicking, like the average negotiation is 48 hours, and we're doing it in 43 minutes between deployment all the way through to debrief type thing. So there is that license is taken. Of course, I looked at it, and the level of expansion of roles, like primary is doing too much, would never happen in reality in that regard. But they also did a fair amount of benefit to us by showing like they have a secondary, they've got boards. He starts really specifically discussing his active listening skills. So to Pat's point about the consultant, they did a really good job of getting that there. Of course, the uniforms, and to be honest with you, we don't wear our stripes upside down here. So I was a little bit confused. Unless you get staff sergeant, then they're upside down. But everything else is normal, if you want to call it that.
When I've actually got the fix for that, the sample is that inside of, again, that series with Sean. By the way, Sean, if you've not seen it, I recommend you watching The Shield, because there's all kinds of everything we're talking about, including a bunch of crisis negotiation and where there's very, very dire things going on and solutions being put into place. Anyway, inside of that program, the officers are actually wearing the badge on what is considered the wrong side. And that's so that when they were on the street, they would be less mistaken for a real police officer. And so I'm just a guess that the reason that Pat is identifying the stripes are upside down is because the stripes are upside down, because that's the fix for the needs to be 7 pieces of difference, so that it's not mistaken for a real police officer.
Sure.
That's a total guess. But I mean, they were on a street. You look at it, that was not a backlot. They were on a street.
Yeah, and I'll give you that. In the end, I want to compare this truly to its own comparators. We can sit here and we can talk about how close it is to real life and so on. Pat and I can also tell you 8 Ways to Tuesday that I don't think a lot of the public would want to watch an active negotiation because it's methodical and it's prolonged, and there's a lot of very unsexy time in it, and that doesn't sell airtime. It doesn't sell media. So from that perspective, if you're putting it against its context, again, being an entertaining television show, I thought they did a really good job. I think there were a lot of elements that they included that were beneficial to give a better snapshot about what the work is that we do and the people who actually do it. So for that, well done. Sure, there's a few things, if I was sitting there in the consultant's chair and they were to listen to me, maybe I would have cleaned up. But
key, right?
I'm just going to say, really, apples to apples, it was a really well done episode.
Yeah, and really what we've got here at the end, it's kind of the call out to you guys. Was this worth your time? Have you watched season 1, episode 5 of Flashpoint? Who's George? Be sure you let us know whether it was worth the call out or was it a waste of resources. You can do all that right now by going over to WhatCopsWatch.com. Again, that's WhatCopsWatch.com. There you're going to find not only this review, but a now burgeoning series of programs that include a bunch, including Pat's Crisis Cop podcast over at CrisisCop.com. You're also going to find Digitally Dispatched, the adventures of a 20-plus year veteran police dispatcher. You're also going to find free field training. That's our friend Tommy in South Chicago, working his ass off in the armpit of Chicago just for you to make sure that police officers and security individuals are trained up. And of course, our newest couple of programs, it's Cops and Robbers Talk.com. That's Chief Chris and the world's most prolific jewel thief, Larry Lawton, talking about different things inside the news headlines. And then our absolutely most recent program, it's called Black and Blue Voices. Black and Blue Voices is exactly what it sounds like. It's the African American community and police talking, having the discussions that have been needed to be had for decades are starting there again. That's over at blackandbluevoices.com. Until next time, the three of us are contingent of WhatCopsWatch.com. I'm Mike Wilkerson, one of your hosts.
And I'm Pat Doran, the other host.
I'm Sean Pollock, the guest Canadian content.
Excellent. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time.
This is the end of your tour of duty. Another episode of What Cops Watch has been filed in records.
But another scene is taking shape. So many criminal stories, so little time.
Check back again soon to WhatCopsWatch.com and join us back in the squad room for your next assignment. Don't be late.
Are you a cop?
You want to tell us about what you watch and why?
Contact us by visiting WhatCopsWatch.com.
And listen to the next episode of WhatCopsWatch.com.